realistically, when a person is killed in front of you, that is enough to silence an entire community. Hegemony of Kashmir Valley, which needs to be broken. Jammu feels that it has been neglected, it has got a stepmotherly treatment a lot. We need to hear those original voices also. How Srinagar city was very liberal in those times. I mean, I used to wear skirts and I would play basketball, and there was music and there was cinema houses and beauty parlors and tourism, of course. I mean, I am sure your parents must have seen the Kashmir in the Bollywood movies of yesteryear, Shami Kapoor's movies. So that's the kind of life we had. Unfortunately, 1990 brought with it terrorism, what we generally know as the Islamization of the valley. And it completely tore the social fabric apart. The great game is in the West is that India has to be put down. They will never let India shine or rise. The caravan, the quaint, scroll, they would never ever hear our side because there was a narrative to be built.
Silence is something which is often imposed rather than chosen. So, this silence that we've been talking about, I think it was sort of an imposition because of the environment that was created among the people and the community. Hi, and welcome to this edition of the Geointerview. Today's conversation is one that goes beyond headlines and slogans. It's about memory, lived experience, and the future of Kashmir. In a time when we see that narratives around the valley are often shaped from afar, this discussion seeks to center voices from within, voices that speak about social harmony, the transformation of Kashmiri society, the position of Muslim women, and how there has been the evolving realities after the abrogation of Article 370. To navigate it all, I'm really glad to welcome Ms Arshia Malik, a writer and columnist who has consistently written and spoken about Kashmir, Muslim women, and the deeper social realities and shifts within the valley, including what has changed in the years following Article 370. We're so glad to have you with us today. How are you doing?
Thank you, Ansika, for having me on the podcast. I'm doing well. Thank you.
That's great to hear, ma'am. Thank you for joining us and for taking the time to share your perspective with us today. So, today's conversation will explore three broad areas. We'll talk about how there has been shifting narratives on Kashmir. Then we'll focus on how and why the civic expression has often remained muted within the valley. And thirdly, a very people centric road ahead after the abrogation of Article 370. So, just before beginning, let me begin by taking you back in time. You have often spoken about a time when Kashmir experienced social harmony. So, could you just paint that picture for us? What did everyday existence look like in terms of festivals, neighborhood life, and shared cultural practices?
It wasn't exactly a harmonious living because once I grew up, I was 15 years old in 1990, and then we started hearing the stories of the Kashmiri Pandits who left. We realized that the 80s and the 70s were more of a fragile pace, an uneasy coexistence, because skirmishes and rioting and all of that used to happen intermittently. So I wouldn't say it was completely harmonious, but yes, we had a shared culture and they have been ancient neighbors for us. In fact, every other neighborhood in Kashmir, I belong to Srinagar city, had Pandit families, they had Muslim families, there would be a temple, there would be a mosque. And of course, Sikh families also, Kashmiri speaking Sikh. So a Gurudwara was definitely there. So this is a kind of multicultural society that I grew up in. Yes, it was peaceful. We definitely did not have any sort of violence there. But it's just that the little bit of violence that we were subjected to would be whenever there was an India-Pakistan match. And depending on the outcome of the match, if India won, the Pandit houses would be stone belted. This is what I've heard the stories from the elders. If Pakistan won, then it would be a lot of firecrackers and bursting and a little harassment of the Pandits. So I wouldn't call it exactly a very harmonious existence.
Hmm.
But we used to have our rituals and all. There was a shared culture. We have this Shivratri, which is generally known in India as Mahashivratri, but we call it Herath. And it's somehow like a spring festival. We have Nowruz also. And the shirni and the sugary things and everything used to go from our house to the temples and all. Same way on Eid day, the pandits used to come to our house the first day. We would invite them for lunch and all. So, and Kashmiri pandits are meat eating Hindus. So, there was never any disharmony, and there was an accepted unwritten rule that, we will not be sacrificing any cows or all. It would just be mutton and goats and all, you know. Uh, and Politically also, there was, you could say, agreements between how to govern in which every voice would be heard. So that was a kind of life. Like I have talked about how Srinagar city was very liberal in those times. I mean, I used to wear skirts and I would play basketball, and there was music and there was cinema houses and beauty parlors and tourism, of course. I mean, I am sure your parents must have seen the Kashmir and the Bollywood movies of yesteryear, Shami Kapoor's movies. So that's the kind of life we had. Unfortunately, 1990 brought with it terrorism, what we generally know as the Islamization of the valley, and it completely tore the social fabric apart. And that's what I grew up in.
Truly, I think when discussions around Kashmir focus only on conflict, the memory that you just shared of coexistence or harmony, it often gets erased or is not often talked about. So, would you say that this harmony that you talked about, or just mere existence of different cultures, was it more cultural or it also had an emotional impact within the communities and how you grew up?
There is an emotional relation between Kashmiri Pandits, Kashmiri Muslims, and Kashmiri Sikhs. For example, many of our families, cousins, and all, when they used to come outside either to study or work, they wouldn't relate so much to the, Indians, as we call them, because the valley is like a bowl. So once you come out of it, you relate more to people from the valley. Like a Kashmiri Pandit in outside in Delhi or in Mumbai would definitely relate more to the Kashmiri Muslim because there's a shared culture, like I said, rather than to the Hindus of mainland India. Same goes for Kashmiri speaking Sikhs. We relate more to them. So, yes, there was this emotional bonding. And like I said, our marriage rituals, our death rituals, everybody participated. There was nothing like what Wahhabism brought later that, you can't interact with them, they are infidels, and this is shirk. It's kind of blasphemy to sit with them and participate in the rituals. This kind of thinking was not there pre 1990. We used to go for mourning to their relatives. They used to come to our homes. In the marriages, we have these wonderful Kashmiri songs that the women sing, and you would have Kashmiri Pandit ladies also. I'm sure you've seen it in Bollywood movies, right? So that's the kind of shared culture. Shared culture means it's irrespective of religion, irrespective of any sect or any creed, you participate together. We were families. We didn't see ourselves as Kashmiri Pandit or Kashmiri Muslim. We had a linguistic identity. We were Kashmiris. We spoke Kashmiri, irrespective of being a Sikh or a Buddhist or a Christian or a Pandit or a Muslim. But when Wahhabism started making inroads in the 1990s and some strange kind of imams started giving sermons in the mosques, they drove that wedge between our society. And of course, they targeted youth. Youth are impressionable. And the youth started lapping up all of those radical interpretations of the scriptures. And they would then come back and tell their parents and elders. And of course, the elders, how much can they resist? When a new generation is getting influenced by a new ideology. And this was also the time in the 1990s, early 1990s, when cable television was making inroads. The internet was not there as yet. So you had these channels coming across from Pakistan being aired. People used to put up those wires and all and somehow catch the Pakistani TV. And if you understand, in the 1990s, a lot of tele evangelists across Pakistan had started preaching Wahhabist interpretations. And that also influenced our youth. So that's how it happened. Otherwise, though, it's still a shared culture.
Hmm.
I still have Kashmiri Pandit friends here,
Hmm.
and we still talk. When we get together, we start speaking in Kashmiri, and the other Indians then start saying you are conspiring against us. You're speaking. It's a very happy camaraderie going on with us. Yeah.
Definitely. I think when you grow up with people around you who have a shared culture and shared understanding, definitely this mutual connection develops a lot. So once we understand that there was this past which was somewhere had some mutual understandings and connections, so when did you first begin to sense that this social fabric was changing? Or do you think there were any subtle indicators that public behavior was changing or community interactions were changing? Or do you think there were other warning signs or something of that sort of an indicator?
There were warning signs. At first, we didn't take them seriously. It would be a small thing like a pamphlet being stuck on a electric pole. We used to have wooden electric poles, or a pamphlet being stuck on a wall, starting to say that the pandits should leave. They do not belong to the valley, right? Or a list of prominent pandit leaders displayed on the mosque as a target. We didn't understand what was happening because, of course, we were not used to having a terror group. We didn't even know what to call them at that time. And slowly, the elders in the family, I noticed, started getting worried. And they would go across to the neighbor, Kashmiri Pandit neighbors, and tell them not to move out much, keep a low profile, don't unnecessarily go to the market unless it's, absolutely necessary. If you need something, please tell us. But we couldn't define to them what it was. They would also ask us, what is it? What is it? And we would say, no, something is wrong, something is off, we don't know, but it's wise for you not to venture out unnecessarily. So then slowly, the first attacks for women, Muslim women, came when they were kneecapped for wearing jeans, because it was the 1980s and we used to wear jeans and all. Then the first sort of a Molotov cocktail thrown on a beauty parlor just to shut it down. Then the first cinema house being burned. So the slow Islamization of the valley began. And then slowly the families which were doing it, instigating the people, their youth, their men, their boys started coming out on street and they would, announce a strike. And there's going to be a Friday strike. And this day and that day, we had never heard of Makbul Bhat, and suddenly a Makbul Bhat day was being celebrated. And this is a time that there was no internet, remember, only a few homes had telephones, landline telephones. We used to make a trunk call. We couldn't even get word out. This was happening. And newspapers used to come late. The national newspaper used to come at 4 o'clock. The Times of India, I remember, through cargo airplanes. It wouldn't come in the morning. So we were starved for information also. And then slowly one day we heard that Lasakol, the director of this Radio Kashmir, had been killed. And then came news of those four Air Force pilots being killed by Yasin Malik. Then came news that Mushirul Haq, the Vice Chancellor of Kashmir University, was kidnapped and murdered. And then came the Rubayya Said kidnapping. So all these things started piling up, and we understood that something big is happening. And of course, the Pakistan name started being dropped. That the boys have to go across to the border. Buses started running that would actually call out and say, anybody who needs to travel to Rawalpindi, please hop on. It's free. And slowly, the boys started disappearing from families. And we knew that they'd run off and gone for training. Elders didn't understand what was happening. And then the Pandit family started leaving. It's like we had a Hindi teacher, we had an English teacher, Mr. Dullu, and suddenly one fine day they didn't come. We thought they are absent or something. And then, 1 week turned to a few weeks, and then 1 month, and we realized they'd actually gone away with their belongings. I had friends, Kashmiri Pandit friends, so every day the class became lesser and lesser and lesser because they had started migrating. The exodus had started, post exodus. And of course, then started the prominent assassinations, like Tikalal Taplu and Sarvanand Premi, the poet, and then we heard of Girja Takku. My neighborhood was Basant area. The infamous Gawkal massacre happened there. And I remember hearing the scream of a lady coming. She had come to take a luggage from Indranagar, and she was murdered. And we happened to know the militant, the terrorist. Her daughter screams. This is something that it's traumatic even today. It never leaves you. You can still hear it in dreams sometimes. It's very jarring. So these were the signs that started, and eventually it turned to 6 months, and then a year happened, and then eventually, of course, the army had to be called in, and we started learning this new vocabulary of crackdown and informer and crossfire, and then we heard AK-47, and we started understanding there's something called a grenade, and there's an IED, and there's a bomb blast, and this came into our vocabulary. We were children. I was 15 years old, and no academic year. It was totally disrupted. Education was totally disrupted. You had to spend 2 years in one class, no examinations, nothing, no electricity. There was no formal government there. You couldn't, if you wanted to pay the bill, where would you go? Everything was shut down. And then you had the army all over. So it was almost war, and war-like situations. And most of the time we would be inside. We would black out in the evenings. We couldn't even light candles because then they said, some sort of airstrike or something would happen. Lot of rumors, lot of histrionics, and a lot of misinformation. Those were terror times, really traumatizing. And we grew out of that. It took us a decade at least to understand that it was Pakistan who was sponsoring this. They were responsible for brainwashing our youth, our elder cousins and older brothers going across the border. And slowly, slowly, we started piecing it together. What is it about? Then we came to understand that, we started reading our history, uh, however we could. The instrument of accession is there. Kashmir had acceded to India. And then Pakistan, there was a standstill agreement of the Maharaja with both the countries. Unfortunately, Pakistan broke that standstill agreement. They raided first. And then the elders were alive who told us about the loot and the pillage and that had happened in Baramulla because of the Pakistani regular army and the tribals that had come across. Then we started hearing about the bravery of Maqbul Sherwani, how he had misled the Pakistani raiders. Then we heard about Major Somnath Sharma, who had given his life to defend Jammu. We heard about Nirmal Singh Sekho, the brave warrior in 1971. We heard about Brigadier Rajendra Singh, who had held the line at Uri and had not allowed them to advance to Srinagar, actually blown up a bridge. So, both we started understand, and then we started connecting to people who had survived the partition. And they started telling about stories how women had been abducted across the border. And this was Pakistan doing that. And then we started questioning the elders. So how did it come to this that today it seems as if the entire valley wants a merger with Pakistan? Because Azadi was basically a merger with Pakistan. There was no two ways about it. There was no doubt about it. There was nothing secular about the movement. Because when you had everything shut down and you were supposed to have attendance at the mosque for five times a day, men were growing beards. The whole getup had changed. There was nothing Kashmiri about it. Now it was all Arabized. Women were supposed to be in abayas and hijabs and burqas. And then we understood that, this is something else going on. Yeah. So, yes, there were signs. We didn't understand what was happening. Slowly, slowly, as 1 year passed into 2 years, and finally the Indian Army started getting a hold of it in 1993. That's 3 years after the first explosion. Uh, we realized that we were in the middle of a proxy war funded by Pakistan. And our boys were getting killed. Our youth were getting killed. Our civilians were getting killed in the crossfire. Even India's knee-jerk reaction at that time, they had no idea what was happening, had also taken lives of our people, what we call as the Gurpil massacre, the Sopore massacre, the Handwara massacre. The state also did not know how to deal with it. So a lot of 1990s was terrible, terrible. The new millennium was different. Of course, the second generation started getting pulled into it. That would be 2011 agitation of the Amarnath land road. But that's when the politicians started getting involved in it. And we started seeing the face of the Azadi movement. That is when the Hurriyat conference was made. And now we realize, okay, these are the people who are standing up and saying, we are the so-called leaders of Kashmir. And by the time we'd grown up and we understood what was happening. Yeah. And the internet started making inroads. So we had this new thing called Facebook, and we started looking up our neighbors, and we started connecting. And the Kashmiri Pandits had no idea what had happened with us in the valley. We had no idea what had happened with them when they were supposed to leave. And we started connecting with school friends and college friends and asking, okay, and we realized they had suffered. They really suffered in those migrant camps in the sweltering heat, which they were not used to. They understood we had lost. Almost every single home in Kashmir Valley had lost a male member, either to firing or to custodial deaths or to extrajudicial disappearances. And So it's that's how it's been once the internet started connecting us. Yes, there was a lot of angst from both sides, a lot of resentment. Uh, they still don't understand when we talk, but slowly, 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 we started building those networks. We both suffered, both the communities have suffered. It requires a lot of empathy both sides. So uh, you have to listen to a lot of ranting and raving. This is what was done to us and all. And once all of the tears and everything are shared, then the reconciliation starts. But it has to be one to one. It can only be one to one. And you need to listen a lot. You have to listen very patiently. There's a lot of pain. Lot of pain. Both sides. Both sides. Yeah.
Truly,
Over
I
to you,
think
Anshul.
this side of Kashmir is often overlooked because people have become so obsessed with the politics of Kashmir and how there have been changing regimes and how Pakistan's role has been there, which has been, we can't deny the fact, but also what matters is the living realities of the people. So I think until and unless you don't get the grounded insights of what the people feel from both the sides, definitely, I don't think we can understand this issue as a whole. And you've truly told all of the events, and which gives us as audience a lot of chills, and it becomes very haunting for us to understand what the phase would have. Since you talked about empathy.
We didn't just connect with the Kashmiri Pandits who had been forced to leave the valley. We started connecting with the POJKNs, Pakistan occupied Jammu Kashmiris. They started understanding the kind of lives we had. For example, what we call as Mirpur, or Rawalakot, what is Pakistan occupied Jammu Kashmir. And they were surprised to know that we had central universities, that we had hospitals, state of the art hospitals, we had colleges, we had pakka houses. I remember at that time, once the internet came. And then we asked them, don't you have this? And they were saying, no, absolutely not. We do not live like this. And they were like, then, you are very pampered by the Indian constitution, aren't you? You have a special status and everything. And India has been funding you basically because there's been no revenue from your side for the last 10 years. And we used to ask them, and they said they have to sign some kind of a agreement with the Pakistan government in case they need a passport that they will never ever ask for any referendum or plebiscite or azadi. And we said no, nothing like that for us. In fact, our youth have gone to the Jantar Mantar in New Delhi and protested there, and they've asked for azadi there in the heart of Delhi. So we started connecting with them also. Then we started connecting with the civilian population of Pakistan as well, who are secular and liberal. I mean, my first space as a writer was given in the nation Pakistan in 2015. That time, India did not have the guts to give me space because I was speaking the truth. And there was this wonderful editor from Pakistan, and he gave me a free hand. And I actually wrote in Pakistan so many times that Kashmir's future lies in India. So then we understood that even there had been there is a secular movement, there is a liberal movement there, and there is a feminist movement there. And then we learned what Ziaul Haq had done there, the martial laws and all. And we realized that humanity was alive that side also. Even they didn't want anything to do with partition. Of course, their ancestors nobody wanted to go through those old chapters again. And they were like, fine, if you're all willing to be with India, it's okay. And we were like, fine, why don't you fight for Pakistan instead of being an Islamic republic, make it into a democratic republic. You can learn from India. And they were very fascinated with India. So it was not just connection with the Kashmiri Pandits or the displaced Kashmiri Sikhs or the Kashmiri Muslims who had been forced to leave, dissenting dissenters. We were connecting with people all across and trying to understand how did Kashmir become this pawn in the geopolitical game. And we are still making connections. We are still connecting the dots and trying to understand how did we get used? How did my valley's two generations get buried in the valleys, scattered graveyards? We are still trying to piece that story together.
Truly, I
Yeah.
think that's a very valuable question to ask, and something that matters to the valley a lot and to its people and even all of the Indians in general. But since you talked about Pakistan, and we know that there have been a lot of terror groups and the nexus of terrorism that has developed in the valley. So, how did militant organizations, do you think, established a psychological legitimacy? Because I think until and unless it was not always about the physical authority that they showed, but it was also how they played with the minds of the people. So, how do you relate this terrorism angle with how psychological legitimacy paved into the valley?
Well, I've really studied into it, and I am one who really wanted to question my grandfathers and my grandparents and my, parents and elders and everybody, that how did we come to this? And then we realized the stories that they told us, all the groundwork was being laid in the 1950s and the 60s and the 70s. There is something called the Jamaat-e-Islami. It has a chapter in Pakistan as well, and it has a chapter here as well, right? You might be able to be familiar with the Jamaat-e-Islami because these days you must be hearing about the Muslim Brotherhood. It had started in Egypt and it was banned in Egypt by their leaders, and slowly they started making inroads into the West. Today, you can see the Muslim Brotherhood sitting in the American Senate in the form of Ilhan Omar. So the equivalent of the Muslim Brotherhood, an Islamist organization, is the Jamaat Islami, right? Now, the Jamaat Islami, what it had done, it had spread into the valley in the 70s, and it had established all these philanthropic schools. So, under the garb of charity, which is something that the terror groups today also do it in Pakistan, they're registered as NGOs, they're registered as philanthropic societies, and that's how they're able to get under the radar, whenever there is a FATF survey or something. And they had, since they were controlling the schools at that time in the valley, the teachers that they appointed, the imams who went to teach in the classrooms, they started indoctrinating the children there. So this fascination with Pakistan was always there because it's a Muslim majority. It was able to carve itself out of a Hindu majority country, and our elders in the family would always be fascinated. We heard in the 1960s and the 70s, Pakistan was economically much better than India. So there was this fascination with Karachi city. There was this fascination that whenever the newspapers used to print some photographs of Pakistan, we used to see they used to have these cars, on the roads of Karachi, very modern cities. And India did not have at that time. So economically, there was this fascination that there is this certain utopia that has been carved out of India, and we should go there, we should explore it, and we should, somehow travel to it. My dad, when he got a passport, I was hoping he would go to some European city, but the first city he wanted to visit was bloody Karachi. And I had to ask him, why is this fascinating? He said, आप वहाँ की गाड़ियाँ देखो, आप वहाँ देखो कैसे रहते हैं, which is true. In the 60s and 70s, of course, we had this socialist economy here, and Pakistan had really gone ahead. But then Ziaul Haq happened, and slowly, the Islamization of Pakistan started, and that's what brought the downfall of Pakistan, what we call. And in the valley, since they realized that there was a very strong constitution, of India. And then you also had secular liberal Kashmiris. There were politicians, there were bureaucrats, there were police officers who believed that Kashmir's future lies with India. So when the Jamaat Islami ideologues started understanding that it's going to be very difficult to wrest Kashmir from, even the Kashmiris themselves who feel, ideologically, why not start a terror movement? And of course, that's where the Pakistan ISI came in. So it's not something that happened overnight. It took decades. Uh, the insidious nature of Islamism is such that it can lie dormant for decades until it sees an opportunity. The Jamaat Islami finally saw an opportunity. The people who were Jamaat ideologues, they started getting into these terror groups. Of course, Pakistan lent a hand, and all the disgruntlement that the youth had with the Indian government, whether it was misgovernance, whether it was corruption, whether it was whatever it was, they went across the border and they shook hands with the Pakistani intelligence services and they got the funding and everything. Because somehow in their mind they got it the idea that they need to challenge the third greatest army in the world. And they did not think about the civilian population. So, I mean, they were very selfish, of course, as terror leaders are. They got a lot of money. It was all about power. It was all about radical political Islam. And they didn't think that, putting a civilian population smack in the middle of the Indian, between the Indian army and them, between guns, what was going to happen? Obviously, a lot of people would die. So that's the groundwork was laid decades ago. If you read Praveen Swami's book, Covert Jihad, He explains it, in very, very lucid terms, how it all started, the secret jihad. I mean, 1947 May Operation Gulmarg was the first of its kind. Major Akbar has outlined it in his book. And then, of course, 65 war also, we were attacked from Kashmir. 71 also again, there was a revenge attack because we had liberated Bangladesh. And then, of course, the Kargil war, smack in the middle of the proxy war, which started in 1990. It's the same Ghazwa Hind, and the bleeding India with 1,000 guns was actually official policy. It still is the official policy. And Zia's war room plans in 1965, Operation Gibraltar, they are still in play. They are still in play. So it didn't happen overnight. It was there. You had the first generation of Jamaats, 1970s, practically our grandfathers, and then it went on to the second generation because the internet was not there. We couldn't see actually what Pakistan was like. We didn't hear anything from the dissenters of Pakistan. Pakistani people who did not agree with their military industrial complex, who did not agree with their leaders. That came later, once the internet came. Yeah.
Definitely. I think you talked about two, three factors or reasoning behind it. You said it can be misgovernance, can be corruption, or can be radicalization. But do we also consider the aspect of silence? Because we think that silence by the community or the people in general on what all is happening with them or near them or what they are witnessing in front of them. So, do you think that silence was becoming common by then and there were no alternative voices that were there, to not to strengthen the hold of Pakistan that was there in the minds of people?
Say, you have to understand the fact that realistically, when a person is killed in front of you, that is enough to silence an entire community. You have to understand the playbook which started in 1990. When you assassinate a prominent Kashmiri Pandit civil society member, it could be like the director of Doordarshan, it could be the vice chancellor of a university who happened to be a Muslim, it could be a politician, a Kashmiri Pandit politician. There was a poet who was killed, and then even civilians. One death was enough to silence people for kilometers. Because remember, this is 1990s. We don't have much communication means of communication. Not many people had telephones at home. And this is what they were banking on, to silence the people in case somebody got up and said, this is not the actual Islam. This is not what is written in the scriptures. This is what you're doing is not jihad, right? So, whenever we are asked, why is the silent majority silent? Please understand the fact that they didn't just kill Kashmiri Pandits or Kashmiri Sikhs, they also targeted Muslims. Anybody who had the guts to stand up and say this is not right. The very easiest thing was to blame him as a traitor. There is a term in Kashmiri called mukbir, which means informer. So they would just label him as an agent of the Indian agencies. And that was enough for anybody to condemn him, and he would get shot. So realistically, आप मुझे बताएं, who would have the guts to stand up and tell the gunman or tell anybody, knowing that the terrorists are on speed dial of even journalists, because journalists were also collaborating with them. There was local help. Like I said, many families belong to the Jamaat ideology, and they wanted a merger with Pakistan. So Muslim on Muslim violence was the first thing that silenced us. And we remained silent because, like, if you see what is happening in Iran today, despite all the internet and everything, there are people getting killed just for, standing up and saying, we do not want to live like this. And the regime has no qualms of killing them. So that's what happened. The silent majority was silent because people were actually killed just for being called Mukbir. Why? Because, he would be a traitor to the cause. And nobody wants to get killed. Nobody wants any gunman to turn up at their workplace. Nobody wants a knock at the door in the night, somebody coming and saying, your, daughter-in-law is writing this in the papers. Like I've faced that. Or your son has been saying this in the chalk there. We will kill him. We are going to kidnap him. But nobody wants that kind of a terror. So now, many decades later, in 2024 exactly, some rumblings of protests were heard. They do come out on the streets now. They do openly say. our future lies with India. That's because the safe space has been created. They know they won't be killed, and it's a natural reaction to terror. You will not stand up, and not everybody is courageous or wants to sacrifice their life. I mean, these are all noble things to say, courage and sacrifice. Like when you have old, infirm parents, you know, and you are the only child, and they are dependent on you. You do not want to stand up to a gunman and get yourself killed. Yeah.
I agree. I think this is also a very powerful reminder to tell people that it's not always about persuasion or it's not always about being the best at it, but it's also that there is this feeling or that instilling of fear within people that stays with you, and it's not always from one side. It's always two-sided. They want to instill that fear so that you don't stand up against anyone, even them or even people who are on your side as well. So you really gave it a nuanced angle. Now, since we talked a lot about how the narrative was formed, I think we should also talk about the current state. So today we see that and we also talked about Iran. So we see that there have been a lot of international narratives as well around Kashmir. So some of these narratives are very symbolic and they are promoted outside of India, that how Kashmir looks like. So, in your view, how can lived testimonies or lived experiences from Kashmir actually challenge these portrayal or these, politically motivated portrayal of Kashmir done by Pakistan or by people who don't want to see the valley in the beautiful state that it wants to be in? So, what do you want to say on that?
Well, I'll be honest that most of the narrative that was played out internationally, that Kashmiris are being persecuted, they're persecuted by Hindu majority India, my people have been complicit in that. I term something called the Intifada factory. It still is a motley group of people who have embedded themselves in the institutions of Kashmir. For example, there are bureaucrats and there are politicians and there were journalists, there are civil society people like doctors and engineers and teachers. You've seen in the Delhi blast case, the perpetrators are common everyday doctors. So they are Islamized. So no doubt the narrative that my people were complicit in that. But I also have to tell you frankly that the certain left-leaning liberal Indian Hindus have also been responsible for it. And today we have uncovered, like me, people like me who keep studying my region and understanding how did it become like this. We understood there was something called a red-green alliance. We call it the red-green alliance. There is a wonderful lady, Asra Nomani. She lives in America. She's a Pakistani American, incidentally a friend of Daniel Pearl, the Wall Street journalist who was killed by Pakistani terrorists, who was beheaded. And she wrote a book, The Red-Green Alliance. It's basically about leftists colluding with Islamists, two separate totalitarian ideologies who are basically at loggerhead with each other. But right now they've formed an alliance because they want to take on the. I've heard the Indian liberals saying they want to take on Brahmanical patriarchy. The Islamists are, of course, they feel the West is the great Satan, and Hindu India also comes under that. So but they formed this alliance. So anything that got published in Al Jazeera or WAPO or Washington Post, right, or BBC or the CNN, then we have had our own left-leaning, the Caravan, the Quint, Scroll, they would never ever hear our side because there was a narrative to be built. So any person who got up and said their own lived experience, like I am speaking, it would kind of put a dent in the narrative. And there's been a lot of censorship of people like me. The Caravan would never take our articles. The Quint would never publish us. We kept sending to Scroll, they would never do it. Now that the print has come in, the print is kind of neutral, but they still have that left leaning thing. And the Wire was a totally Pakistani mouthpiece for decades. It kept giving space to these Islamized journalists from Kashmiri origin, and they termed it as if it was, a grassroots movement, this separatism from India. And those of us who used to say, no, this is Islamist exceptionalism. This is not something what you call a Azadi or a freedom fighting movement. They would never give us space. So, for some part, yes, it's been local Kashmiris who've done this international narrative which is there about Kashmir and all. But then it has also been left leaning Hindus, you know. and they still do it. They are still employed because, of course, the great game is in the West is that India has to be put down. They will never let India shine or rise. And to have well-adjusted, assimilated Muslims speaking and saying that Kashmir's future lies with India, or India is perfectly okay with the 180 million Muslims. That kind of puts completely skews the narrative. So they will do that. They will do that. And unfortunately, India has also been on the back foot. It is still decades behind all the pushback narrative that we call it. We've started countering the disinformation and everything, but we are still decades behind because Pakistan has been quite ahead of it. Yeah.
Yes, and you've been very right about when you talked about barriers. So, we were also discussing about silence and how it made me realize that silence is something which is often imposed rather than chosen. So, this silence that we've been talking about, I think it was sort of an imposition because of the environment that was created among the people and the community. And that is why I think this silence is often misread as consent when it was basically protection of the people or for them to safeguard themselves. So,
Think about it. I was one of the few people who got up and stood and said the hijab has been coerced on us. The first person to oppose me would not be a Muslim. It would be a Hindu from India and calling me Islamophobic. It not being funny, I would say, first of all, Islamophobia is a misconstrued term. It's been created by the Muslim Brotherhood just to shut down debate within us. And we have a lot to debate within the community. There is a lot of regressive practices that we need to talk about. I am not even talking about the hijab. I'm talking about Muslim personal laws. I'm talking about Sharia laws. So, you can't just shut me up just because you think that I might be playing into the hands of whatever they call it, Islamophobia and all that. First of all, that's the problem. So imagine that the first person to shut me down would be a Hindu, and today we have a term for them. We call them useful idiots because we understand the Islamism game. It's for domination and supremacy. Me at great risk, people like me are taking risk and telling you and warning you that do not let into it. Please be firm about it. Even if you're called a fascist state, please do something about Islamism because it doesn't end well for anybody. They might come for you also someday, which you saw what is happening in Afghanistan and Iran. But uh, like I said, it's left-leaning Indian liberals who actually been our enemies. I mean, being a Muslim woman, I've never had support from Indian liberal women when you talk about regressive practices, when you said that hijab was coerced on us, beauty parlors were closed, cinema houses were burned down, we were practically confined to our homes. We were not allowed out. Our education got disrupted. This was what you would today define as a Talibani kind of situation. And yet you say that those men and boys who went across and got trained in arms training, they were fighting for our freedom. They were not fighting for our freedom. They were curbing our freedom. So, that's
yeah,
it's been a long time in coming, and speaking out. I got old speaking about it. I've been speaking for 20 years, but I think it's high time that these stories need to be told. Yeah. So the silence was imposed on us. It is still being imposed on us, but I'm sorry to say, half the Indian population is responsible for it. The
definitely.
left leaning one.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the whole idea of perspectives and
I
how,
still don't get space to write. I still don't get space to speak. And somehow I've been looking for doors wherever it opens, whoever gives me space, I keep saying it. Because, I have to speak the truth. I am witness to that. And until I'm alive, I need to do that so that the next generation doesn't fall into it. They don't get radicalized or they don't get brainwashed. Somebody needs to speak up and say it. Yeah.
truly. Also, I was thinking when we were talking about hesitation to speak or when we were talking about this silence, where do we place the role of education and media in this? Do you think that rebuilding a sense of confidence among the masses to speak for these issues, do you think education and media has a role to play in it for
These
everyone?
are two different things. Education, in the sense, is first of all, the let's talk about the campuses that we have in India. They used to be wonderful campuses. I've heard of a time in the 60s and 70s, the university campuses used to hear both sides of the debates. There was no left or right wing at that time. You agreed or disagreed on values. So it didn't matter whether the idea came from the right or whether the idea came from the left, whether the idea was socialist or whether the idea was capitalist. People used to agree. You've had wonderful governments in which opposition parties used to be friends, and they might disagree on certain policies. But this polarization that we have seen in post 1990s, in the new millennium, this is astounding for me. I have heard of children sitting in JNU college lectures or doing these PhD theses. They talk to me, these scholars, and they say, we are censored. If you want to really, really write about what has happened in Kashmir, for example, there are professors who censor you. They will not give you those grade points and all. They actually practically make you change your thesis. So if you're talking about education, it has to be a free education. You need to hear the other side as well. You cannot divide the university campus into left and right. There has to be a battle of ideas. That is it. Media is something else. Because of the advent of technology and because of the advent of internet and all, it is possible for someone at home with a video camera or a phone camera to make wonderful movies. Right? This is a great opportunity. If you see recently, Indian cinema has also started opening up, where you used to have these pathetic, whitewashing kind of movies like Mission Kashmir and whatnot, Fana, and all these I don't know, Yaha and everything, which actually didn't tell you the story, Haider for that matter. Now you had a Kashmir Files, now you had a Baramulla, and recently now you had a Durandar. So media is changing too, and open cinema has to be that. Indian cinema needs to learn from Iranian cinema. They need to learn from Turkish cinema or Saudi Arabian cinema for that matter. You need to show things as they are. Let the audience decide. And audience are not, it's called the bigotry of low expectations. You are being a bigot if you are not expecting the audience to make the decision for themselves. This is something even the majority does for us Muslims, that you have so low expectations of the Muslims that you're being a bigot to them. You are not expecting them to, transcend their circumstances and critically think for themselves. You keep putting the victim card on them. So, yes, I agree, education and media, but both of these fields have to evolve. The education needs to get more and more neutral. No matter where the idea is coming from, battle the ideas, not where it's springing from, which side it is coming from. And media, it needs to be open, it needs to show things the way they are. Let the audience decide. You can't term everything as a propaganda. How does that work? Right? Ah.
Right, truly. I think when you talk about movies like Baramulla and all of these that actually show you the reality, which people haven't been they haven't been witnessing it. Because in Baramulla we see that how the realities of the Kashmiri Pandits or the horror that they went through, that is shown in a manner that stays with you and actually is etched in your memory and is not something which seems very whitewashed or just made for the entertainment purposes of it.
You may disagree with the movie, but you should not censor it. There is no
Yeah.
censoring. Freedom of expression cannot be, censored. You can't have selective, display. Like you keep praising a movie like Haider. I had objections to the movie Haider. I think it was one-sided. Same way you can have objections to the Kashmir Files and say it's one-sided. But I've never asked for a ban on Haider. I think it's a beautifully made movie, but it was skewed in its narrative, right? So that's what you need to evolve. You may agree to disagree. That's the basic principle. But you can't kill a person for it. You can't completely silence his or her artistic expression just because you don't like it.
Definitely. I think that's just how there should be a balance between both the sides. And both the sides should exist, and the audience should have the perfect motive to understand or to choose which side they want to be on, but at least see both the sides. Just to understand it all and have now a last holistic perspective of our conversation till now, we've seen that it's been years after the abrogation of Article 370. So, what tangible transformations stand out to you, but equally also to understand what gaps do you think still need urgent attention when we see Kashmir post Article 370?
First of all, the abrogation was handled brilliantly. Not a single civilian death occurred. Yes, the narrative that went outside in the international channels was that, there's a blockade and there's curfew and internet blockade and all that. But they didn't realize the fact that it was all being done just to save lives, because the mobs can be mobilized in seconds. And then the stone pelting would have started, which actually is the intention of the Islamists, just for the security forces to retaliate. This is how it works. This is something we've understood there. But the international channels do not know that. So brilliantly handled, but within 3 years, all the gains of whatever we had gained post abrogation, certain mistakes were committed by the state. I don't think the valley was ready for an election. But still, since India needs to uphold its democratic credentials, the elections were held. We got a partial democracy. The CM was elected, and we've had a terror-free election. That was something. That was a testimony to the fact that abrogation was peaceful. And it was a record of 35 years also that we had 58.46% of voter turnout. So that's one thing. Democracy is there. But infrastructure wise, development and everything, as a state should do for its union territory, that all is there. But radicalism is something, it's like a virus which never actually goes away. And it is already a sensitive region. You need to handle it delicately, just for the purpose of saying that everything is fine, and we've abrogated and there's a lot of development coming, the train is coming, the roads are being, we have a smart city now, a lot of schemes are there, prime minister schemes have been extended, a lot of our laws have been extended. Just because all of that is happening doesn't mean the political radical Islam has been checked. It will take years before that happens. An entire generation of Kashmiris has to grow up under a peaceful and stable peace. There has to be economic stability and there has to be a real peace. Dismantling the terror modules will take a decade or so. So that is the gap. I feel that we are rushing the peace in the valley. Now that the terror modules have started operating in Jammu region as well, which was not there earlier. You had a Pahalgam. You've just had a Delhi blast where the perpetrators were linked to Kashmir. So that should show you that radical political Islam, the virus is still there, and it needs to be handled differently. But tremendous development, tremendous progress. There are these youth programs which are there. A lot of, I think there was this Prime Minister's Jal Jeevan scheme, tap water reaching to rural areas. We've had the train is going to come. We have an inner train. We have a train till Katra now. Just that connection has to be made between the Jawar tunnel and all that. I think there are plans for smart city, youth employment. A lot of startups have started. A lot of entrepreneurship has started. We have had full academic calendars, which was not possible earlier. Uh, Children are going to school, colleges are there, the universities are coming up, hospitals are working. It's more of a people-friendly administration. But like I said, Kashmir's problem was always misgovernance. And corruption is something, there'll never be any zero corruption. So that fight is still there. And we are dealing with climate change as well. We've had a tremendous tourism boost post abrogation. I think you've had record number of 3.3 million or something. And it's full occupancy hotels and all. We are, I think, contributing a lot towards exports also, because we have handicrafts and horticulture and all that. So economically, yes, stabilizing, but politically and ideologically, it will take time. So I hope statehood is not in the cards as yet, at least not for the next 10 years. And we need to do away with the dynast politicians also. It will take some time because people still don't trust the state. So hence, the Umar Abdullah got elected, because probably they think of Kashmiri, and there is this hegemony of Kashmir Valley which needs to be broken. Jammu feels that it has been neglected. It has got a stepmotherly treatment a lot. We need to hear those original voices also. Ladakh has done well. It's a separated union territory now. I'm sure, we keep wishing them well, that they are on a good track. But for Jammu, because Jammu region has been the backbone of breaking the terror, counterinsurgency and all. They are patriots there. Kashmir Valley also has patriots, but unfortunately are more loud, radical, even though they are minority. They have been too loud and their voice has been amplified. So the image that internationally people get is the whole of Kashmir wants Azadi. They just want separatism from India. That is not like that. The JNK police is made up of majority Muslims, and these are Muslim officers who are in counter-terrorism operations, right? So that perspective will change, but to be handled very delicately and not to rush to announce success, that post abrogation everything is fine. Everything is not fine. You keep seeing a Pahalgam happening or a Delhi blast happening. Everything is absolutely, that would be very unrealistic to say 30 years of radicalization is gone in a few years. It'll take a lot of time and to be handled with a lot of care. Because, see, ultimately, a Kashmiri's dignity is to be upheld. You cannot humiliate a person constantly and expect them to be loyal to the country. Every time there is a Delhi blast, we understand for secular liberal Kashmiris like us, there's a lot of pressure to stand up to radical political Islam. We are trying to do that at great risk to our lives. But when a Kashmiri student is harassed just because the perpetrators had links to Kashmir, that kind of makes our work harder. And then nothing coming from the center to condemn it. The politicians also, Indian politicians, should be very vocal about it every time a Kashmiri student is thrashed or harassed, a Kashmir shawl seller is slapped, for no fault of theirs. And they'll have to be very vocal about it that yes, Kashmiris are a part of India. Absolutely. They've given blood. It's not like we've not given blood for the country. But yes, we understand radical political Islam is a problem. 1979 onwards, the whole of Wahhabism spilled over into Kashmir. The Afghan Jihad spilled over into Kashmir. It'll take a long time. And then, the silent majority is silent basically because of the terror factor, the trauma factor. That will take time. And the safe spaces are being created. Everything takes time. You can't rush success. You can't rush prosperity. Healing takes time. Yeah.
Truly, you said, and I quote, that healing takes time. And I think that is the most important aspect. And that also shows that how long-term social impact matters a lot rather than just having immediate outcomes out of this change or this shift in the valley. So we can.
The first thing that should have been on the cards should have been a truth and reconciliation program, because the truth and reconciliation has to happen both sides. The Kashmiri Muslims needed to acknowledge, especially the younger generation, that yes, ethnically the Pandits were cleansed. There was a terror pogrom, and some of our families were complicit in, making them run away from here. We cannot have the Jagmohan Kanad all the time. But at the same time, the Indians, mainland Indians, need to understand that the Kashmiri Muslims have also suffered. I mean, we have lost lives. Uh, uh, there are thousands and thousands who have been missing. There have been custodial killings. There have been extrajudicial deaths. There were, in fact, we did exhume a few bodies, a few decades ago, where there was misidentification, where they had been labeled as terrorists and they had been killed by the Indian army. I mean, those probes are yet there. So, truth and reconciliation means both sides agree to the fact that yes, mistakes were made, errors were committed, and violence was there. Because, see, if you look at the nations of Germany, for example, Germany actually teaches Holocaust in its academic campuses. They do educate their population that, there was a very bad time for us that we had done these things to the Jews. And today, if you see, Germany has prospered because the youth have grown up knowing the sins of their fathers or grandfathers. They face it. Same goes for Japan. Japan had a horrendous, this relation with America, as you know, the atomic bombs were dropped. They did not come out of the war with that permanent enemy mentality. Today, they are friends, and Japan uh, did a course correction. They became economic giants, Asian economic giants. So it's not like something like that cannot be replicated in Kashmir. But for that, a truth and reconciliation kind of committee has to sit. There is something called Alport's contact hypothesis. This is in psychology, where Alport was a psychologist who believed that You need to sit, if there is regional divide, if there is an ethnic divide, if there's a sectarian divide, you need to make those people sit with each other on equal basis. You need to have a joint project together. You need to give equal responsibilities to those people, and there will be a shared sense of belonging, right? So that kind of program needs to be there. The state showed a lot of will when it abrogated Article 370. I don't see the same will of the state when it wants to rehabilitate Kashmiri Pandits or when it wants to do this truth and reconciliation. That will seems to be missing there. And it's not like it's not possible. Everybody used to say Kashmir is a conundrum. The status quo is never going to change. No political party has the guts to abrogate Article 370. It will be political suicide. But see, they did it. It was possible. Once you start thinking out of the box, the same thing can be done now for the healing process. A truth and reconciliation program, definitely, to bring the two communities together. Not just the two communities. I mean, there have been displaced Kashmiri Sikhs as well. There are displaced Kashmiri Christians as well, and agnostic Muslims as well. They had to leave the valley. You know, atheist Muslims, agnostic Muslims, what we call dissenting Muslims. So, a truth and reconciliation, all sides.
Definitely. I think that also shows us that how there is a need of balance between progress and all of the pending challenges that needs to be acknowledged. Ms. Malik, thank you so much for sharing such a thoughtful perspective with us. And particularly after the abrogation of Article 370, I think the transformation of Kashmir must ultimately be measured not only in these policies and these projects, but also how secure, heard, and hopeful people in the valley truly feel. So, thank you once again for your time and insights. And thank you to our viewers for joining us on this edition of the Geo interview. We will continue to bring you conversations that center lived experiences. Until next time, thank you for watching.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.